Purpose-Driven Progress. I am your host, as always, Jigapix, and today we're talking all about boundaries. Boundaries aren't like a barrier, but they're really just a bridge to better balance. And apparently today, I'm going to see how many B words I can get into a single sentence. So let's dive in. Boundaries for me, man, this was kind of a really big lesson for me, learning early on in kind of my outside sales career. Now, at the time, I was in real estate. And as a lot of us know, real estate can be a really fluid environment, meaning that there's lots of nights, there's lots of weekends, and there's lots of open houses if you're doing the job well. And there was one night when things really kind of came to a head for me. So I was sitting in an open house on a Tuesday or Thursday night, which is kind of unusual for most real estate agents. But I was experimenting. So I love to experiment. I like to try new things to see what kind of results I get. So I was doing a lot of experimenting. So I scheduled an open house on a Tuesday or Thursday. I can't remember which it was, but it was from 5 to 7. And I thought maybe I'll get, some a little more unique crowd. Maybe I'll get some more serious buyers than just like your typical looky-loos that want to come and look at the open house that's down the street. Now, this home was a split level, meaning it's one of those houses that you walk into the front door and you're immediately greeted by two sets of stairs, one that goes down to the basement and one that goes up onto the main living area. And I remember sitting in this living room on the upstairs, and essentially I was just twiddling my thumbs. And remember the homeowners had this ugly, ugly beige couch. And it was one of those couches that, in my opinion, it wasn't nappable. That's how I rate couches and how nappable it is. Can you lay down on it and get really comfortable? It was one of those couches that was a lot more form than comfort. You know what I mean? So I was twiddling my thumbs on this ugly couch. And I remember that the homeowners had this really nasty smelling like lemon, wall plug-in. And it was just really, really awful. And well, the unfortunate thing is that this wasn't my listing. I was helping out another agent. And so I couldn't be like, hey, can I text him like, hey, can I take this freaking ugly, nasty, lemon smelling thing out of your wall? So I was just chilling with this ugly couch and this nasty lemon smell. And I was waiting for the buyers to come, for the folks to come and check out the house. And I was waiting and I was waiting and I was waiting. And nobody showed up. So I remember feeling like kind of crappy, just kind of defeated, like, oh my gosh, am I even doing the right things here? And I remember going home after my open house got done at 7 or a little after, got everything shut down. And I had more stuff to do. So I had to do some contracts I had to write that night. I had some follow-ups to do, those kind of things. And I remember I probably quit working around, 10 o'clock or so. And it was just a crappy feeling because I realized that none of those things that I was doing was actually urgent. So I decided that enough was enough. So I had to come up with some way to essentially get my life back. So I did our strategy on boundaries. Now I call this strategy building the moat. Meaning you're kind of like building your moat around your life castle to make sure that you're actually living the life that you actually want. Now the first thing to bear in mind when we're building the moat is Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law tells us that however much time you give a task is the amount of time that it'll typically take. Even if it's a task that would typically take you half an hour, if you give yourself 2 hours, it'll probably fill that full 2 hours. Now that's really important to bear in mind when we're talking about boundaries, to make sure that we are managing our time well within those boundaries, managing ourselves well. So the first thing you want to do when you're building boundaries is you want to define your priorities. What are the things that actually matter to you? Is it making sure that you're getting as much done at work as you possibly can in the allotted time so that you can go home in a timely manner to spend time with your kids or your spouse? Is it making sure that you have time with your friends and your family to make sure you're actually getting to all the things you want to get to? So what are your priorities? The second thing is to make sure you're communicating clearly. Meaning that if we're talking about work stuff, for example, which a lot of us are when we're talking about boundaries, then make sure we're communicating with our boss, like saying, hey, Mr. Boss Man, said, I love this job. I really love the work that we're doing. I feel like I'm doing a good job, but I want to make sure that I'm home by 5:30 or 6 o'clock because I want to make sure that I'm spending every single dinner that I can with my family and expressing that to them, but also expressing to those that you care about For example, if you're in a season of work where, you're kind of rising and grinding, which we'll talk about later, you're rising and grinding and telling them very clearly, like, hey, listen, this is a new job. I care about it a lot. I think this could be really, really great for me, for our family, for whatever. And this is probably going to be a season where I'm having to pull longer hours, and expressing that to them, but expressing that in such a way that you're being direct, but you're being kind at the same time. We don't need to bash people over the head with our words. That's a lesson that I've learned in my life that we'll probably talk about on another podcast. So don't be nasty, like I said, and use a lot of I statements. So don't be like blaming people for anything, but use your I statements. The third is to stay consistent, meaning that just because we set a boundary with somebody, if we don't enforce it, then we might as well not have that boundary at all. So make sure that we're enforcing it with those folks and being kind about it in the meantime. And if we need to reiterate it, say like, hey, we talked about this before. This is a new boundary I'm having with you. You can't be speaking to me that way. You can't be acting in such a way anymore. And this is just a boundary that I have. So reiterate that when you need to. And fourth, recognize that there is probably going to be some pushback, because a lot of the folks in your life, work, whatever, are used to you being a certain way, used to you acting a certain way. And when you set a new boundary, that's shifting things, that's changing things for you and for everybody else. Just knowing that you might get some pushback where people might forget unintentionally, not maliciously, or they might just say like, hey, you've done this before. And you just say, well, I used to do this before, but I'm not going to do this any longer. This is the new boundary that we have. So stay firm and remember why these boundaries matter to you. Something I like to think about that really kind of reinforced this whole idea for me. I heard this, I don't know, probably on social someplace, that the only ones that will remember you worked overtime in 20 years will be your kids. I say that again. The only ones that will remember you worked overtime in 20 years will be your kids. Now, I think about this kind of, because I don't have any kids, at least as of right now. So I think about this as a single guy with no children. And I think, so in 20 years, who right now will remember that I worked overtime? Now, there might be, some friends and family that, they don't see me as often because I'm working so hard. But I kind of feel like it might not be much of anybody. And that, I don't know, it's kind of discouraging almost, because I'm working super hard, but nobody will remember. But the thing I want you guys to remember here is that working a long hours can be really, really great for a season, but only for a season. We cannot make working all the time our life. And it's so easy to do. It can really become who we are. It can become our identity. The reason I always say that it should only be for a season, and that season might be a few months, that season might be for a year or two, but if it ends up being not so much a season, but just the entirety of what we're doing, then that can become a problem. But when it is that season, it can be a good foundation for what we're becoming. Meaning that if we're just young folks and we got out of college and we got our first real big kid job, and we want to work super hard and we do a really, really great job, then that can be good. But again, only for a season, because eventually burnout will catch up with us, or we will realize that we're missing out on the things that are actually important to us. Now, when we say that, that doesn't mean that you're removing boundaries. That means you're just setting your boundaries a little more specifically, a little differently. Meaning that, let's say you are a parent and you want to make sure you're spending time with your kids. So you set a boundary at work saying, hey, I'm only going to work, from, when we get in at 8 or 9 to 5 or 6. That's kind of your boundaries. I want to get home and to see my kids. But if you're a young person saying, hey, I'm going to, in the office, I'm going to work, from 9 to 5, like we were talking about. But then from, 5:30 when I get home until 7, that's when I'm going to try to get ahead on some other things. But after that, then I'm home, I'm chilling, I'm relaxing. I think this is absolutely hugely critical, this next point, because when we're talking about the grind, we're working hard, right? We're rising, we're grinding, we're out here, we're working hard. But when we're working hard, we want to make sure that we are resting hard too. Now, what the heck does that mean, Jacob? What does resting hard mean? Resting hard means being very intentional about it. So let's say, for example, that you are a young person, you're rising, you're grinding, you're working hard. You're working like you get in, at 8 o'clock before everybody else, and you leave at 6 after everybody else. You say, hey, after that, I'm going to get home at 6:30, and then I'm going to work until 9. So you're putting in a bunch of hours, right? Being intentional means that, let's say you're doing that 5 or maybe even 6 days a week, but then on the 7th day, you are relaxing. And I don't mean like, I put my laptop away, but I'm still like, I'm jotting down some notes about some ideas that I've had about things. And, maybe I'll do some research on some other ideas that I've had. And I mean, actually being intentional, actually putting everything down, putting it away, and spending time with friends, spending time with family. Maybe you're more of a solitary person and you just want to relax at home and watch some of your favorite shows. So, I mean, actually setting up that time, whether it be time blocking or whatever, where you're actually putting it in your calendar saying, on Saturday or on Sunday or whatever day makes sense for you, you are actually resting for the full day if you can manage it. Now, the thing a lot of folks tell me is that, hey, kids got a lot of stuff going on. I don't feel like I can get that full day in. Okay. My next question is, well, how much can you do? Now, maybe that might just be like, hey, Sunday afternoon from 1 to 3 or 4, that's what I can foreseeably time block out, or and I can actually schedule in time to rest. If that's what you can do, then start there. So the most important thing with all of this is to start. Not start perfectly, but to start, try some things out and see what works for you. Because let's say you are one of those folks that only from 1 to 3 on Saturdays is the best time for you. The only time you can really schedule out a time to rest and relax. We'll start there. Try that for 2, 3, 4 weeks, see what works well, and then iterate and say like, hey, 1 to 3 was great, but I realized that I can actually do like 1 to 4. I can actually do a little bit longer than that than I realized. So then do that and see how that works, and see how that feels, see how that jives with everything, and build on it and iterate as things go along. The important thing is to start building your moat, like I said. To sum all this up, let me tell you guys about my dad. Now, my dad was a really, really great guy. Unfortunately, he passed away, a handful of years ago now. But for me, I mean, like a lot of guys, I suppose, like my dad was larger than life. He really was a superhero. He always seemed to know what to do. He knew how to fix everything in the house, it seemed like. And he was always helping me on things like working on my T-ball swing, which was a very, very short-lived phase in my life. My T-ball never really got that good. He was always at my, my school events. I played tennis for a long time in the summers, so he was always at my tennis matches. I was pretty unsuccessful at tennis as well, I might add. But he was always there. He's always at, whatever it was that I was doing, school play or whatever else. Now, I don't know if he ever sat down with my mom or if he sat down with, his boss or anybody and had these kind of boundary conversations like we're talking about today. But I do believe that he knew what kind of life he wanted to lead. Meaning maybe he didn't have these boundary conversations, but he knew that he wanted to be the kind of dad that was always there when his boys needed him, when his boys wanted him around. And because he knew that work would kind of always be, it's important, but it would never be the most important. Now, I have to imagine that between my brother and I, so we probably gave my dad more than his fair share of headaches, but he showed up anyways, of course. Now, I do remember a few times in middle school, specifically, when, I would get out of school and he was supposed to, pick me up to take me home. But he had gotten caught up at work, so we would call him, like, hey, are you on your way? And I remember, I was waiting not hours and hours by any means, but being an impatient little guy, I remember it felt like hours and hours. Now, I tell you all that not to, highlight, my dad's faults or his successes or any mistakes or anything that he's ever made. But I tell you that as much as I loved my dad and still love my dad, he didn't get it 100% right all the time. He wasn't perfect. He did what he could when he could. And that's what I want to leave you guys with today. So don't go for perfect. Do what you can. Get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Even if it's just a little bit, just enough where you start to feel a little uncomfortable, because that means that you're growing. So try some of these things out. Set some boundaries and iterate and try different things and see what works. because boundaries can be a huge part of your growth. So thank you all for listening. I know I say it all the time, but it really does mean the world that you guys are willing to sit down and listen to me, blather on for a little while. So don't forget to subscribe for more great strategies like this, and be sure to share this episode with someone who maybe is in a season of rise and grind. So it can be a gentle reminder that it's just a season. So I'll see you guys next time.